Good evening, and welcome to After These Messages, a new series where we take a look at adverts from days gone by and see what kind of impact they have on us today. Will they make us smile, laugh, cringe, maybe even cry? Well, that's what we're going to find out. And for today's episode, we're diving into the world of video games and looking at some adverts from one of gaming's earliest pioneers, Atari. Atari was one of the first major video game companies that ever supported the fledgling industry. After early arcade hits including the iconic Pong, Atari would eventually make its way onto television screens in the home, with the introduction of their first home console, the Atari Video Computer System or VCS, and later also known as the Atari 2600. For being one of the first systems to offer interchangeable cartridge games, this little box of joy was a revolution for its time, and still stands as one of the most iconic consoles ever released. So for the commercials, we're going to take a look at Atari ads through the years. So let's start with one of the first, which would serve as the launch pad for the VCS itself.
Attention shoppers, the new Atari cartridge game is in.
Excuse me.
Uh-oh, George again.
Atari's AFC battle.
It comes with 27 games, but that's just for starters. You can get 9 cartridges, 187 games.
Blackjack. Oh!
I'd like an Atari.
Sorry, only our demonstrators left.
Mine!
No, George. Mine.
The new video computer system by Atari. More games, more fun.
A fun little ad to start off with. I love how the release of Air Sea Battle on the VCS warrants a shopping tannoy announcement. I mean, if you've played Air Sea Battle, let's just say there are much better VCS games that are worth announcing. But I digress, this was 1977, and the launch year of the system itself. I like the comedy they employ with the obsessive customers, arguably predicting the stereotype of people who are addicted to video games. The comedy from this itself is quite harmless when you break it down, it's just a good old joke to laugh at, but what I can't ignore is the debatable false advertising from the shop salesman. You can get 9 cartridges, meaning 187 games? What he means is game variations, with the actual core game of those 9 remaining the same. But considering video games were still quite new in the home, I can easily imagine that someone might have been duped into thinking you actually got 187 unique games if you picked up all 9 cartridges. As I say though, this was the very beginning of the Atari VCS's life. So now we will move on 1 year forward and see what kind of games Atari are advertising in 1978.
Okay, Atari, let's see your best pitch.
You're out, Rose.
I quit soccer to play Atari.
You need more practice, Haley.
You can't keep me in here, Atari.
The Atari Video Computer System is 20 cartridges with 1,300 game variations you play on your own TV set. Don't just watch television tonight, play it.
No, Pele, I'm pretty sure you didn't quit football to play Atari. This advert could be classed as one of the first video game adverts to feature recognisable celebrities endorsing the medium. Here we have baseball player Pete Rose, and of course Pele from football fame, and Don Knotts as the convict. What I like about these cameos is that in the sports games, the celebrities are shown to lose and are in a way made a butt of a joke. Not in a horrible, demeaning way, but in that more humorous sort of style. Even though these people are masters of their sport, they now need to remaster their craft, but in video game form. And considering how primitive sports games were back then, they're giving it a damn good go. As for the Breakout segment, did you know that apparently Breakout is the story of a convict breaking out of prison? Well, I sure didn't, and I wonder if that's the official story or if they just invented it for this ad. But overall, it's good fun, and shows how quickly and effectively Atari was becoming a household name, especially with the presence of these familiar faces. Moving on now, by 1981, Atari was pretty much ingrained in households. So let's take a look at this Atari Anonymous ad from the same year.
Atari Anonymous. My son Boris has a missile command problem.
My mission in life is to save all of mankind.
Lately, my daughter has developed a similar problem with Atari warlords. Now with video pinball, my husband is acting funny lately. With Atari games so ingenious, so involving, so intense, I ask you, Atari Anonymous, is this problem contagious? As
you can see, Atari never lost the humour within its ads. I like the whole approach of an Atari Anonymous group meeting to discuss how addicting the company's games are. For this ad, Missile Command, which is one of my favourites, Warlords, Video Pinball, and Air Sea Battle all get a few seconds in the spotlight, and in a way it's a good showcase as to how accessible the games on the VCS were for everyone, even if they were dead simple in design. The mother asks at the end if the problem is contagious, and the answer is, well, possibly. Video games are quite the addicting medium, that's for sure. So it may not be the most memorable advert Atari has put out, but it still showcases some good humour and also the confidence that their games are doing well, and reaching all kinds of audiences as a result. But now let's take a look at some ads for individual games, and to start off with, let's have a look at Vanguard.
Atari presents its newest star.
Vanguard. Just like the arcade, 6 zones.
Let me show them the mountain zone.
Hey, check it out. Get the energy pies.
So long, Harley Rockets.
Hey, the rainbow zone is my turf. You can shoot in 4 directions.
All right.
I'll just freeze to the stripe zone. The wall. The wall. Yeah.
But fellas, who destroys the Gond?
Luther destroys the Gond.
Vanguard is here, only from Atari.
Goodness me, so many questions. On the surface, this is arguably one of the most 80s Atari ads ever. A bunch of geeky boys glossing about the latest video game, methodically talking about its different levels. I mean, you couldn't dream up a better stereotype. They claim it's just like the arcade. I mean, like a lot of Atari VCS ports, that is highly debatable. Also, I love how excited they all sound at the prospect of being able to shoot in 4 directions. Truly a novel concept back in the day. But the one big thing I can't fathom, why is it that Luther has to destroy the Gond? Like, why does it fall to him? And also, why is he portrayed as some sort of hulking idiot? I mean, overall though, Vanguard is a solid game, don't get me wrong, and if these hilariously 80s adverts like this help sales of said game, well then I guess at the end of the day, we can't complain. But now for our next Atari game ad, let's have a look at Centipede.
Centipede from Atari. It could change your life.
Help! Somebody call an exterminator!
Well, wasn't that an assault on the senses? This seems like a sort of history of monsters in movies 101. As soon as the lad is taken into the TV, we're treated to one of the most thumping 80s backing tracks I've ever heard, and then a montage of black and white and colour film clips, shots of the military, and some sort of corny looking centipede creature. I love how we only see a few seconds of actual game footage in this whole minute of advertisement, with most of the time it just echoes 1950s B-movies. And to be honest, I do like the approach, the classic threat of something looming, getting closer, and even though it may look a bit laughable, it does have a charm. Also, the ending seems a bit odd. Is it implying that the boy has become the centipede? Because if that's the case, his wish for someone to call an exterminator seems a little off, as he would be asking for someone to wipe himself out? I don't know, I think I'm heading into this too deeply. But now let's move on to our next ad, delving into the superhero world with Spider-Man.
I'll blow this town to smithereens! Time bombs! Try to get up there in time, Spider-Man!
Watch me cut my web, Goblin.
Watch yourself fall, Silk Slinger!
Gotta stop the bombs in time.
If I don't get you, webhead, my diagnosis will!
Holy Hannah!
And you're running out of fluid!
Is this more action than even Spider-Man can handle?
Spider-Man, a video game from Parker Brothers, the ones to beat.
Wonderfully, wonderfully cheesy. The fact that we have the Green Goblin teasing Spider-Man about playing a video game is hilarious in itself. The fact that the Goblin places a live pumpkin bomb on top of the TV set, and yet Spider-Man is infinitely more concerned with his progress within the game, is also hilarious. If this was done today, I can imagine it being greatly more serious in its execution, but back in the 1980s, most superhero features and commercials were kinda goofy. Also, the final line from Spider-Man, asking if the action is even too much for him, that just cracks me up, because he's claiming a video game, named after himself, is too much for him to handle. Well, Spidey, with all the games about you that were to come, you better brace yourself, otherwise you're definitely going to have some sort of heart attack. Alright then, next up we're going to take ourselves into space, with a firm favourite, Star Wars.
Star Wars. It's great in the arcade. Whoa! TIE fighters! Fireballs! Coming right at me! Watch the laser towers. Aim for the tops. Pick in the cannons. Use the force. It's coming too fast! It's way! Which way? My shields are gone! Alright! I'm going in!
Oh, some game, huh?
Some game!
In a galaxy of video games, there is only one, Star Wars.
The most exaggerated performance ever. Now, I know the gameplay shown for this ad was for the Atari 5200, which was the successor to the VCS, but don't worry, we're getting there. The advert tries to make the game look exciting, but I wonder if it actually ruins the game's credibility by making this performance so over the top. Not only do I fail to believe that any gamer, whether casual or hardcore, acts like this towards Star Wars on the VCS, but can we just please address that from the sheer excitement, this man's head explodes, or apparently explodes only to make his hair a bit more frizzy, and determine that he has some sort of worrying obsession with this Star Wars port from the arcade. But nevertheless, it survived because it's over the top, because it's silly, and even though in my view it's not the best commercial to represent Star Wars, it is still a great commercial to look back on and to laugh. But now let's move on to something a bit more horror themed, as we look at the ad for Tunnel Runner.
They think I'm trapped, but I'll escape.
Tunnel Runner, the new video game where you don't look down on the maze. You're in it.
Monster! He's smart, I gotta outsmart him. Oh, he's fast, I gotta be faster.
Tunnel Runner with RAM Plus to megacharge your Atari VCS for 3 times the excitement.
Right, left. Better check the map. It's the exit to another maze.
Tunnel Runner from CBS Electronics, where the excitement never ends.
I'm not trapped. I'm not trapped.
So this one I've always found slightly unnerving. We see someone trapped within a TV set, running through the primitive 3D mazes that Tunnel Runner offers, avoiding monsters, finding the exit, only to be trapped within another tunnel. I think this ad works for a variety of reasons though. The grim delivery from the boy, the haunting music that plays, and the desperation of this boy to be free, it all makes for a fairly tense advert for a relatively simple game. Yes, I know the monsters look primitive, but imagine back then in the early 80s, if this was the first sort of 3D game you had ever played, and you had this thing moving right towards you, almost coming out of the screen. Quite the chilling effect. A smartly made advert for a very interesting game. So now we've had a look at some of the ads that showed off what the Atari VCS or 2600 could do, but now let's have a look at some for its successor, the Atari 5200.
If you think ColecoVision plays all Atari cartridges... You mean it can't? Here's Pac-Man on ColecoVision. But here's Pac-Man for the Atari 5200 Super System. Now you're talking. And it doesn't work on ColecoVision. But won't their adapter? It won't play Super System cartridges. Not pole position? Not this pole position.
Not centipedes?
Not this centipedes. Only on the Atari 5200 Super System. But aren't they hard to find? They're everywhere. Everywhere? The Atari 5200 Super System.
Ah, the supposed promise of an ill-fated video game system. Now, for anyone who knows anything about the 5200, you'll know that it's one of gaming's biggest flops. Awful controllers, lack of any real breakout new games, overpriced, just so many factors went against it. Sure, compared to the 2600, the graphics on games like Pac-Man are a rapid improvement, but sadly most of the games featured here are games that had either been out for ages already, or that were already available on other consoles, including the 2600, which millions of people already owned. Also, the last line claiming that the consoles are everywhere is wonderfully ironic, as in, yeah, they were everywhere, because hardly anybody bought them. Super system, you say? Sadly a super disappointment, if you ask me. Let's see if another ad for the 5200 could do any better.
This is an arcade game. This is the new Atari Super System. Arcade, Atari Super System. You may like the Super System better, It has some of the best arcade and sports games and plays every Atari cartridge. It even does something no arcade game can.
Telephone! It's Judy!
It lets you freeze the action.
Hello, Judy.
The new 5200 Super System.
Okay, I can safely say I prefer this one. Instead of comparing previous console generations where there is bound to be an obvious difference, here instead they compare the arcade originals to their 5200 counterparts, showing how close the experience is mirrored between the two. And also they highlight the pause button functionality the 5200 offered. And I know a pause button is a common trait of gaming now, but before this you weren't able to pause your games, so to offer something like this could have been a game changer back in 1982. Sadly though, once again, aside from showing off the arcade style quality and the pause button, in terms of games, there's nothing really shown that makes you go, wow, I really need to buy this system. So sorry 5200, you just ain't quite cutting the mustard. Now 1983 unfortunately would herald the video game crash and almost wipe out the industry in America entirely. But after the crash and the subsequent boom of video games in 1985, led by Nintendo with their NES console, Atari decided it was time to get back into the ring and try to seize dominance once more. They had two plans to do this, one being to launch their new console, the Atari 7800 Pro system, and also to re-release the 2600 VCS at a majorly discounted price, along with a new redesign. So let's have a look at the ad that relaunched the VCS in 1986.
The fun is back, oh yes siree. It's the 2600 from Atari. It's the video system with classics galore, from Space Invaders to cars that roar. A real hip joystick controls the screen. Solaris is hot and Midnight Magic's mean. And one more thing, it's got a special low price, under 50 bucks. 50 bucks? Now isn't that nice? The fun is back, oh yes siree. It's the 2600 from Atari.
So it's very clear with what they were trying to do here. Soon after the ad starts, they claim that the system is home to classics galore, not afraid to showcase some of these classics, even if by 1986 the graphics shown by the 2600 were a tad outdated. But of course, graphics don't necessarily make a game, and the emphasis on fun is rammed down your throat with the hope that the under $50 price tag is going to be enough for you to get out your wallet and start paying up. Ultimately, this proved to be a somewhat good move for Atari, as the 2600 would continue to sell at a moderate rate until the early 1990s, with new games amazingly being released during that time too. But out with the old and in with the new, as we now take a look at an ad that attempts to show off the newest kid on the block, the Atari 7800.
Don Mallard, captain of the U.S. video game team.
When I'm not going for high scores in the arcades, I'm home playing games on my Atari 7800. As an expert, I like the 7800 because there are great arcade hits like Mario Brothers and Donkey Kong Jr., adventure games like Impossible Mission, sports games like Hat Trick and Real Sports Baseball, action games like Desert Falcon and Karateka, and the 7800 plays all the 2600 games. As a consumer, I like the 7800 because most games cost under 20 bucks.
The Atari 7800, the choice of the experts.
I'm not entirely convinced. To start with, I'm not sure if there was a US video game team at the time, but this guy definitely sounds like he's reading off some sort of cue card. Sure, his points hold some merit. The 7800 is home to a lot of great arcade ports, and a lot of the games were relatively cheap compared to the competition. But in a way, like the 5200, there just wasn't enough fresh and new and exciting games to get consumers interested. Playing arcade ports is fun and all, but by this point people were playing games like Super Mario Bros. And The Legend of Zelda. All these simple games seemed outdated by comparison. But hey, Atari has never been a stranger to shaking up their advertising, so let's take a look at this ad from 1990 and see how they tried to appeal to the kids of the day.
What do you want? What do you think? What do you want? I want the latest games anywhere. What do you want? I want the sounds that curl my hair. What do you want? 7800s everywhere. What do you want? I want Atari. I do. What do you want? I want Atari. What do you want? Atari 7800. Ow.
Atari's the name of the game, dudes. Check it out at these rad stores.
No, 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 no. Absolutely no. This is the cringiest of the cringe by far. You're clearly trying to appeal to young children, as you have them featured as the centre point of the advert, yet you try and do that with a horrendously written attempt at rap? A very corny punchline, and the fact that you don't even let people see the full picture of your games half the time shows that you're somewhat clutching at straws here. I'm sorry Atari, but by 1990 in terms of video games, kids certainly for the most part did not want you. Especially as the year before Nintendo released their groundbreaking handheld console, the Game Boy. Atari the same year also released their handheld offering, so let's check out an advert for the ATARI LYNX.
Can anyone handle the power of color?
ATARI LYNX, the portable video arcade. LYNX, so packed with action. Racked with attraction. Stacked with more games for total satisfaction. It'll blow you away. LYNX, more fun and games from Atari.
Oh, the LYNX, what a mess that was. Now this advert tries its very best to tout the impressiveness of the LYNX, the fact that it's backlit, plays games in colour, boasts arcade quality ports and titles, and that all might look somewhat impressive here, but if you've never owned or played the LYNX, unfortunately the reality is quite different. The LYNX was very bulky, it drained batteries very quickly, and ultimately again, like the 5200 and 7800 before it, just didn't have enough standout games to try and eat its way into Nintendo's strong-armed grip on the handheld market. Now we'll take a look at one more LYNX ad, and you might recognise a familiar face in it.
Hey, Mr. Block, can I go to the bathroom?
2 minutes.
Oh, yes! Cut back! Oh, yes, yes! I'm in the tube! Oh, yes, yes! Oh! Right!
Introducing LYNX from Atari, the color video game you can get away with. Well, sometimes.
Yep, that's Tobey Maguire alright. Long before he was shooting webs as Spider-Man, Tobey can be seen here rocking some sort of horrendous sleeveless denim jacket, somehow being able to lug around a LYNX in his inside pocket, and playing what I can only describe as some sort of surfing game? Honestly, you're trying to show off your console's games and you decide to film, off the screen itself no less, some sort of generic looking surfing game that doesn't look remotely interesting whatsoever? And the tagline is an absolute joke. The system you can get away with, mate? You could get away with a Game Boy, hell, maybe even Sega's Game Gear, but if you're talking about being stealthy, the LYNX is the last handheld system I would get away with. Also a little thing to note, there's one shot of this advert that shows something plugged into what I assume is the headphone jack, but when you cut to shots of Maguire, he has nothing in his ears. So that's just some pretty lazy continuity. Also, Tobey mate, I know you've gotten better as you've gotten older, but is this really all the reaction you could muster?
Oh, yes! Oh, yes, yes! I'm in the tube! Oh, yes, yes!
Never mind, Tobey. Never mind. But let's fast forward now to 1993. Atari has one last attempt to make a serious stake in the video game world, releasing its last home console, the Atari Jaguar. Let's see how they tried to market this one, shall we?
Some of you believe your system is the most advanced in the universe. Let's review the numbers. Sega Genesis is 16 bits. 3DO is 32 bits. The Atari Jaguar is 64 bits. Which is more advanced? Clifford! With 64 bits, 3D graphics, real-world animation, and lightning speed that you can only get with Jaguar. Which is more advanced? Clifford!
Can you repeat the question?
Jaguar! Jaguar! Jaguar!
I'm sure you've all seen or at least heard of this one. The slogan, "Do the math," would become synonymous with the Jaguar, as Atari would ram the fact that the console was 64 bits right down your throat. The early 90s in gaming was also concerned as to how many bits your system had, and 64 sounds pretty good, right? Well, sadly enough, the claim to being 64 bits was about the only thing the Jaguar could muster, as the vast majority of its games either didn't use the system to its full potential or just offered games of poor quality. Now the next ad I'm going to show you is a short one, and my comments on it will be short also, so here it is.
Here's Benjamin Hall on the Jaguar system to play Cybermorph. Let's see how those beastly graphics and intricate moves that only come from 64 bits of Mega Power feel. Then, Cybermorph only on Jaguar by Atari. Get bit by Jaguar.
Yep, he puked on the screen. Cybermorph is a terrible game in every conceivable way possible, therefore this advert of a boy puking after playing it is entirely accurate and should be remembered as such. Right, that is done and dusted, and now, for our final advert of the day, let's take a look at a commercial that was shown to highlight one of the better games on the Jaguar, Alien vs Predator.
Introducing Alien vs Predator for the 64-bit Atari Jaguar. You might not want to play it alone.
Ah! Mom.
An advert with a surprise ending, that's for sure. At first it all seems pretty standard for a video game advertisement, even right down to the hand on the shoulder being implied as a mother telling her son to get off the game system for 5 minutes. However, when you see it's the alien holding up the limp arm, that's when things turn sharply. I know the ad is for a mature game, but to imply that this boy's mother is dead and that the boy himself is then consumed by the alien is quite a ballsy move for this sort of advertisement. I also like the little touch when we see the do the math slogan, with the beat flatlining after the words are spelled out. A nice little horror-based advert for one of the Jaguar's better games. Overall, Atari as a video game company experienced all the highs and lows you can get in the industry. There were early pioneers, truly bringing consoles into the home and creating arcade games like no other, but then they would just fall sharply, releasing failed project after failed project, never again regaining the footing they once had in the video game world. And yes, they are still around today developing games and mining their legacy content for all it's worth, but the adverts we've looked at today truly show something special, especially with the earlier ones where companies weren't afraid to include lots of humour or little stories into their advertising for comparatively simple video games. It shows a lot of creativity and ingenuity from the marketing and design teams, and for me at least, I know a lot of these adverts, for better or worse, are going to be stuck in my mind for a long time to come. And with that, I hope you've all enjoyed this episode of After These Messages. And if anything, I hope they brought back some nostalgia for those of you who remember seeing them when they first went out. And for those who are new to these, I hope they've provided an insight into the time they've come from, as well as what advertisements were like back then. Please leave a like, a comment, share the video around, subscribe to the channel with notifications on. You can donate to my Patreon if you like. And until the next one, I shall see you all
After these messages, we'll be right back.
good night.